The huge fireplace in the great hall was as cold as the grave, its fire long since burnt out. Rintoul sat at one end of the long table in the centre of the hall, directly opposite Ishmael. It was loaded high with cold meats, fruit, wine, and bread by the basket load. Between them, down each side of the table and on elaborate chairs padded with cobalt velvet, sat the corpses of the elite guard, their skin as dry as autumn leaves and just as discoloured. Their stomachs were full from the feast, but their veins were empty. The two vampires had watched them from the shadows as they ate, eventually striking with such speed that the soldiers had no chance to attempt to defend themselves. The last man Rintoul had drank from tasted like goat's milk, and he remembered from his living existence it was not a flavour that he had enjoyed. Ishmael, however, had long ago learned to ignore the aftertaste that his victims' diets left in their blood. But he did enjoy drinking from those who were inebriated. The alcohol had a similar effect on the vampires as it had on the living, but to a somewhat lesser extent. Like some undead parody of upper nobility, Ishmael sipped from the gold goblet, the silverware long since removed. It was full with blood drained fresh from the wrists of one of the soldiers. "Did you ever imagine you would be sitting here at the table of the rich?" asked Ishmael. "No, neither did I imagine I would be a vampire." Ishmael laughed, the blood thick in his throat. "Do you like it? Being a vampire?" Rintoul toyed with the edge of the wooden bowl before him, stomach churning at the thought of once having needed to digest all that solid food. "What I really think makes no difference. You saw to that." Rintoul's scarred face looked back at Ishmael, the disfigurement from his torture made permanent by Ishmael's bite. "We vampires are meant to be free of the constraints of emotion, but I do not believe that to be so." Ishmael replaced the goblet on the table and leant back in his chair. "Do you hold it against me that I turned you?" Rintoul pursed his lips, fangs protruding. He traced their sharpness with the tip of his tongue. "You call me a newborn. You consider me to be immature. You expect me to have a measured response, not driven by the fact that you made me like this only a matter of days ago. And therefore you cannot answer me," responded Ishmael. "Is that what you are saying?" Rintoul considered. "I agree that without you I would have suffered a cruel death at the hands of the Turkish commander. Yet what has he become? Is he any different?" "He is Caleb now. Caleb in every way." "What does that mean?" Ishmael stood and walked slowly towards Rintoul, bringing his goblet with him. "You saw Caleb out there on the battlefield. You saw how he took that soldier. What did you make of him?" "He's a monster. Bloodthirsty. He is like us." Rintoul tensed as Ishmael stopped behind him, feeling a cold, undead hand rest upon his left shoulder. "He is not like us," Ishmael said coolly. "He is nothing like us." Rintoul frowned. Ishmael sensed his companion's confusion. "He is neither living nor vampire. He was destroyed by witchcraft so many years ago, and yet the spell still sits inside his rejuvenated heart like a cancer." "If he is no vampire, then what?" Ishmael clenched his teeth, finding it almost unbearable to say. But if he did not reveal this to Rintoul, then his goal would be even further out of reach. "He is tertium quid, not pure enough to rule us." What was Ishmael saying? Even as a newborn, Rintoul felt the allegiance to Caleb. He was their father in darkness, and the link all vampires had to him, irrespective of their generation, was innate. For Ishmael to talk like this was tantamount to blasphemy. "But he is our master." "I know you feel it too." "No," Rintoul replied, a hand to his temple. I don't know what I feel." With the strength only a vampire has, Ishmael grabbed the back of Rintoul's chair, shattering it like matchwood. He tossed the goblet aside, its contents splattering across the floor behind him. Rintol tumbled to the ground, startled. Tensed, he was ready to spring back up, but Ishmael stood over him, blocking his ascent. Wary of Ishmael's sudden unpredictability, Rintol wondered what he had been like when he had been alive. The blonde hair, the fair complexion. He was not from this part of the world. Ishmael placed a booted foot on Rintol's chest and pierced the palm of his own left hand, flicking the ensuing blood across the floor, the table, and Rintol. Much like the beasts in the forest, the vampire marked its territory. But it was unlike the feral vampire. The vampire's reason for scenting its chosen surrounding was purely hierarchical. The prone newborn wiped the scarlet emission from his eyes. "I made you, Rintol. You are mine to command." Ishmael's eyes squinted, his voice slowing to a harsh whisper. "You will obey me." Rintol frowned, unsure if the sudden ringing in his ears was real or an illusion. He tried to break Ishmael's deep gaze, but found himself transfixed. It was as if Ishmael was seducing him all over again, just as he had done so in the dungeons many feet beneath him, just as he had done so when he was alive. Feeling a terrible wrench between his instinct of penitence to Caleb and intimacy to the one who had made him, Rintol tried to bow his head, but his companion's stare was strong, unwavering. The dark shadows of blood-filled tears collected in the corner of his eyes. Rintol wanted to lash out, to bite and claw his way clear, but the incessant ringing in his head altered in pitch and became much more soothing. Suddenly, overcome by a wave of exhilaration, Rintol shifted onto his knees in front of Ishmael and watched as Ishmael bared his own chest and sliced it once, diagonally, with a sharp fingernail. A welt of blood followed, and Rintol, like a sanguine dog, waited until the delicacy was offered him. Then, pouncing on the blood, Rintol lapped until his thirst was slaked. Ishmael smiled and placed a hand on top of the young vampire's head. "Now go, and spread word amongst our kind of Caleb's impurity." "To what end?" gasped Rintol, Ishmael's blood clotting around his lips. "Why, my coronation, of course," Ishmael purred, pushing Rintol to the floor. "Don't you see? I intend to replace him."